The smell reached them before they saw the valley. Deputy Marshal Theodore Grimshaw pulled his mare to a halt at the crest of Widow's Ridge, one gloved hand rising instinctively to cover his nose and mouth. Behind him, his three companions, Deputy Lucas Pendleton, County Tracker James Holloway, and the aging clerk Morton Fairchild, stopped their own mounts, their faces contorting as the wind shifted and brought with it that unmistakable sweetness. The cloying, stomach-turning perfume of death. "Christ Almighty," Pendleton muttered, his young face paling beneath his hat brim. Grimshaw said nothing. In his 20 years of service, first as a Philadelphia constable and now as a federal marshal, he'd smelled that particular corruption enough times to know what waited below. The October morning was cold and bright, the Pennsylvania backcountry dressed in autumn's finest colors, crimson and gold leaves trembling on skeletal branches, frost glittering on brown grass. It should have been beautiful. Instead, the valley below looked wrong in ways Grimshaw's trained eye couldn't quite articulate. Too still. Too silent. "How long do you reckon?" Holloway asked, spitting tobacco juice onto the frozen ground. The tracker was a lean, weathered man who'd spent 40 years reading signs in wilderness and civilization alike. "Weeks, at least," Grimshaw replied, lowering his hand from his face. The smell was everywhere now, inescapable. Maybe longer. They'd been riding for 3 days to reach Ashcroft Chapel, sent by the federal marshal's office in Philadelphia after a prominent merchant family named Whitmore had raised concerns about their daughter, Prudence. She'd joined the religious community 2 years prior, along with 60-some other souls seeking spiritual purity away from the corruptions of city life. For 18 months, letters had arrived regularly, cheerful accounts of prayer and labor, of community and faith. Then, in July, the letters had stopped. The Whitmores weren't the only worried relatives. By September, nearly a dozen families had reported the same silence. The federal office had dismissed it initially. Religious communes were often erratic in their correspondence, prone to periods of isolation and intensive spiritual focus. But when a traveling merchant reported that he'd stopped at Ashcroft in late August and found the place seemingly abandoned, doors hanging open and livestock wandering loose, the authorities had finally taken notice. Grimshaw had been given the commission personally by Chief Marshal Henry Thaddeus, ride to Ashcroft Chapel, determine the status of the community, and report back with all due haste. Now, staring down at the collection of weathered cabins clustered around a modest white chapel, its tall iron cross visible even from this distance, Grimshaw knew his report would be grim. "Mount up," he said quietly. "And steel yourselves, gentlemen. I suspect we won't like what we find." They descended into the valley in single file, their horses nervous and snorting, ears flat against their skulls. The smell grew worse with every step, thick enough to taste. Grimshaw's mare, usually steady as stone, danced sideways and tried to turn back twice before he forced her onward with firm hands and low words. The silence was absolute. No chickens clucking. No cattle lowing. No dogs barking. Not even birdsong, as if every living creature had fled this place and left only stillness and rot behind. The first cabin they passed stood with its door ajar, one shutter hanging loose and banging softly in the wind. Through the opening, Grimshaw glimpsed a table set for supper, plates still in place, a pot hanging cold over a dead hearth. Pendleton rode closer and peered inside. "Food's here still," he called back, his voice tight. "Molded to nothing, but you can see where it was. Looks like they left mid-meal." They passed 6 more cabins in similar condition. Beds made or unmade. Tools propped by doorways. A child's wooden doll lying in the dirt path, its painted face staring up at the pale sky. All abandoned. All silent. But no bodies. Not here. The chapel stood at the valley's heart, a simple structure of whitewashed wood with narrow windows and a steep roof. The iron cross mounted above its entrance was taller than a man, wrought in elaborate scrollwork that gleamed dully in the morning light. The chapel's front door hung open, swaying slightly. The smell rolled out from that darkness like something alive. Grimshaw dismounted 20 paces away, his boots crunching on frost-dead grass. His hand went instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip, though he suspected no living threat awaited them inside. "Mr. Fairchild," he said, glancing back at the clerk, whose face had gone the color of old cheese. "You'll remain with the horses." Fairchild nodded vigorously, clearly relieved. Grimshaw drew his revolver. Beside him, Pendleton and Holloway did the same, their faces grim beneath their hat brims. Together, the three men approached the chapel door. The stench was overwhelming now, a physical force that made Grimshaw's eyes water. He pulled his kerchief up over his nose and mouth, it helped not at all, and stepped across the threshold. For a moment, his mind couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. The chapel's interior was dim, morning light filtering weakly through narrow windows and the open door behind them. Rows of simple wooden pews lined either side of a center aisle. At the far end, where an altar should have stood, there was only emptiness and a dark stain on the wall where something had once hung. And in the center of it all, arranged in a perfect circle perhaps 15 feet in diameter, lay the bodies. 17 of them. Grimshaw counted automatically, his marshal's training overriding the nausea churning in his gut. All wore identical black robes, now stained and rotted. All lay face up, their heads pointing inward toward the circle's center. Their feet pointed outward, like the spokes of some grotesque wheel. The decomposition was advanced, weeks, certainly, perhaps more than a month in this cold autumn air. Flesh had blackened and collapsed against bone. Empty eye sockets stared at nothing. Mouths gaped in silent screams. The hands of several were raised, fingers curled into claws, as if they'd died fighting against something unseen. Behind him, Grimshaw heard Pendleton stumble back toward the door, retching. Holloway remained, though the tracker's weathered face had gone pale as milk. "Mother of God," Holloway whispered. Grimshaw forced himself to look at the circle's center. There, lying flat as if deliberately placed, was a massive wooden cross, 8 feet tall at least, made of rough-hewn timber. It should have been mounted on the wall behind the altar, he realized. Someone had torn it down and laid it here, in the exact center of the circle of bodies. He took a step closer, breathing through his mouth, trying not to look too closely at the ruined faces. The cross bore markings, deep gouges carved into its surface. Even in the dim light, he could see they weren't random. Letters. Words. Names, perhaps. "Sir," Holloway said hoarsely. "Look at their hands." Grimshaw tore his gaze from the cross and examined the nearest body. The corpse's hands were positioned over its chest, and between the skeletal fingers gleamed something metal. A nail. The old-fashioned kind, hand-forged and square. He looked at the next body. Another nail. And the next. Each of the 17 corpses held an iron nail in their dead hands. What in hell happened here? Pendleton's voice came from the doorway, shaky but determined. The young deputy had controlled his stomach and returned. "I don't know," Grimshaw replied. His voice sounded distant to his own ears, as if someone else was speaking. "But these are the masters. The community leaders. See their robes? That's what the reports described." "Where's everyone else?" Holloway asked. "You said there were 60-some souls at Ashcroft." "Gone," Grimshaw said flatly. He turned slowly, taking in the full horror of the scene, the circle of death, the fallen cross, the dried blood that had pooled and spread and darkened the wooden floorboards. Either fled or... He didn't finish the thought. They searched the rest of the chapel in grim silence. A small room behind the altar, empty save for vestments and religious texts. A narrow stairway leading down to a cellar, they descended only far enough to determine there were no more bodies waiting in that darkness. Everything else was unremarkable, save for the violence that had clearly occurred in this main chamber. It was Pendleton who made the final discovery. "Marshal," he called from outside, his voice urgent. "Out here." Grimshaw emerged gratefully into clean air, though the smell clung to his clothes and hair. Pendleton was crouched beside the chapel's eastern wall, near a tangle of dried brush. He pointed. A body lay there, half hidden in the undergrowth. Unlike the others, this corpse wore no black robe, only ordinary clothing, now rotted and stained. And unlike the others, this one had clearly been trying to escape. Its skeletal arms were outstretched, fingers dug into the earth as if it had been crawling away from the chapel when death claimed it. But what caught Grimshaw's attention was what the corpse still held, clutched in one bony hand, pressed against its chest as if it had tried to protect it even in death, was a leather-bound journal. Pendleton reached for it carefully, prying it loose from the skeletal grip with gentle fingers. The journal was weathered and stained, its pages brittle, but intact. "Should we read it, sir?" Pendleton asked, looking up at Grimshaw with haunted eyes. Grimshaw stared at the journal, then back at the chapel door, where darkness and death waited inside. He thought of the circle of bodies, the fallen cross, the iron nails. He thought of the 60 missing souls and the families waiting for news in Philadelphia. "Yes," he said quietly. "God help us, yes. We need to know what happened here." If you're enjoying this descent into darkness, subscribe for more macabre tales from history's shadows. Drop a comment below telling us what you think happened in Ashcroft Chapel. They made camp in one of the abandoned cabins, the cleanest they could find, farthest from the chapel and its cargo of death. Grimshaw wouldn't allow his men to sleep within sight of that white structure with its iron cross. Even Holloway, who tracked murderers through swampland and slept beside mass graves during the Mexican War, looked grateful for the distance. The cabin belonged to a family, judging by the size of the beds and the small wooden toys scattered in a corner. Pendleton built a fire in the hearth while Fairchild unpacked their provisions with trembling hands. No one spoke much. The horror of what they'd seen had settled over them like a shroud. As twilight crept across the valley, Grimshaw sat by the fire and opened the journal. The leather cover was embossed with a simple cross and initials, N.A. The first page bore an inscription in neat, careful script: "This journal belongs to Brother Nathaniel Ashcroft, faithful servant of the Lord, devoted master of Ashcroft Chapel. May these pages reflect his truth and his glory." July 1, 1850. Grimshaw read aloud by firelight, his three companions listening in silence. July 1, 1850. "We gathered this morning for the dedication of our new iron cross, forged by Brother Samuel Torrance in the smithy and mounted above our chapel door by the labor of faithful hands. Master Ezekiel Harrow led us in prayer, and I confess my heart swelled with pride and devotion. 2 years we have labored in this valley, building our community far from the corruptions of Philadelphia, far from the false prophets and hollow rituals that plague the churches of men. Here, in Ashcroft, we live as the early Christians lived, in common purpose, in shared labor, in absolute devotion to God's true word. We are 17 masters in total, chosen by divine revelation to guide our flock. Beneath us, 63 souls who have surrendered their worldly possessions and earthly pride to walk in righteousness. The children number 12, each one a blessing, each one raised in purity that city children shall never know. Master Ezekiel spoke today of our sacred duty. We are not merely a community, he said, but a purification. We are burning away the dross of modern Christianity, returning to the pure ore of faith. Some may call us harsh. Some may question our methods. But God does not call us to be beloved of men, He calls us to be righteous. The crops are growing well. Sister Constance Merriweather reports the children are healthy and learning their scripture. All is as it should be. Grimshaw paused, glancing up at his men. Pendleton was staring into the fire. Holloway was cleaning his revolver with mechanical precision. Fairchild had wrapped himself in a blanket, looking small and old. "Sounds pleasant enough," Pendleton said quietly. "At the start, anyway." "Keep reading," Holloway said. "It never stays pleasant." Grimshaw turned the page. July 15, 1850. Master Ezekiel has instituted new protocols for spiritual discipline. Brother Marcus Fenimore questioned the severity of our fasting requirements during this morning's council. He suggested that perhaps the children, at least, might be exempted from the 3-day fast mandated each fortnight. Master Ezekiel grew very still when Marcus spoke. Then he asked Marcus if he questioned God's will or merely the vessel through which it flowed. Marcus apologized. We all voted to maintain the fasting schedule without alteration. The children are stronger than they appear, and hardship builds godly character. I confess, though only to these private pages, that I have noticed some restlessness among the flock. Sister Prudence Whitmore was heard speaking to Sister Abigail Thornfield about her family in Philadelphia. She expressed longing to send them more detailed letters, to perhaps visit during harvest season. When I reported this to Master Ezekiel, he reminded me that we had all severed our earthly attachments upon entering Ashcroft. Our families are here now. Our home is here now. Prudence will be counseled. I am certain she will see the error of such divided loyalty. July 28, 1850. The crops are failing. Brother Josiah Creed, who manages our fields, cannot explain it. We had ample rain in spring, and the soil tested fertile when we first arrived. Yet the corn withers. The wheat grows thin and pale. Our potato stores from last year are nearly depleted, and this year's harvest will not replace them. Master Ezekiel says it is a test. God is examining our faith, seeing if we will remain steadfast even in hunger. He has increased our fasting days from 3 to 5 each fortnight. Some of the younger children cry during prayer now. Their mothers comfort them, but I see doubt creeping into eyes that should hold only devotion. Last night, I heard Master Ezekiel speaking in his quarters. I thought at first he was praying, but when I paused outside his door, I realized he was conversing. As if someone answered him back. His voice would rise and fall, pause and continue, in the rhythm of dialogue. Yet I heard no other voice. No other sound at all. I did not knock. I do not know why, but I did not knock. Grimshaw's voice had grown quieter. The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called, the first animal sound they'd heard in the valley since arriving. He was mad, Pendleton said. This Ezekiel had to be. Perhaps, Grimshaw replied. Or perhaps he was something worse, a madman who believed himself sane, who convinced others of his righteousness. He continued reading. August 10, 1850. Sister Prudence Whitmore has been corrected. She was discovered attempting to leave Ashcroft in the night, carrying a bag of her possessions and some food from the community stores. Theft and betrayal, Master Ezekiel called it. Theft of God's provisions and betrayal of her sacred vows. She was brought before the masters in the chapel. We sat in judgment while she knelt before the cross. Master Ezekiel asked her if she understood the gravity of her sin. She wept and said she only wished to see her mother, who was ill in Philadelphia. She swore she intended to return. Master Ezekiel said that illness of the body was nothing compared to illness of the soul, and Prudence's soul was gravely ill indeed. He pronounced her sentence, 3 days in the cellar, in darkness and silence, with bread and water for sustenance. Time to meditate on her faithlessness. Time to hear God's voice in the absence of all others. I voted with the other masters to approve this discipline. Yet as Prudence was led down those narrow stairs, her sobs echoing up from the darkness, I felt something. Not doubt, surely. But something close to it. The other masters seemed untroubled. Master Silas Blackwood even smiled and said that sometimes the Lord's medicine tastes bitter, but it cures nonetheless. I find I am sleeping poorly these nights. August 23, 1850. A child died today. Little Margaret Thornfield, daughter of Abigail and Joseph Thornfield. She was 7 years old. The fever took her in 3 days, burning hot at first, then cold, then still. Abigail screamed when we took the body for burial. She had to be restrained by her husband and 2 other sisters. She kept crying that Margaret was hungry, that the fasting had weakened her, that God would never demand the death of children. Master Ezekiel rebuked her sharply. He said that God gives and God takes away, and that Abigail's grief was natural but her accusations were blasphemous. Margaret's death was not our fault, it was God's will, inscrutable and perfect. We buried her in the meadow beyond the cabins. 12 graves there now. 12 small stones. All children. All since last winter. After the burial, I saw Abigail speaking with several other mothers. They stood in a tight circle, heads bent close, voices too low to hear. When I approached, they fell silent and dispersed. I should have reported this to Master Ezekiel. I did not. God forgive me, I did not. September 5, 1850. Master Ezekiel has begun receiving visions. He announced them this morning during prayer, divine revelations that come to him in the night, commandments delivered by angels, truths that supersede even Scripture. The first vision commanded that we masters take spiritual wives from among the unwed sisters. Not marriages in the earthly sense, Master Ezekiel explained, but holy unions ordained by God to strengthen the community's spiritual bonds. Some of the younger masters seemed pleased by this revelation. Brother Silas has already selected Sister Ruth Calloway, who is 18 and comely. The girl wept when told of her new duty. Her weeping was called a sign of her humility. I have no spiritual wife. At 43 years of age, with gray in my beard and fatigue in my bones, I told Master Ezekiel that I was content to serve God without such bonds. He looked at me strangely but did not press the matter. The second vision was more troubling. Master Ezekiel says God has shown him that some among our flock are false believers, wolves in sheep's clothing, corrupting our community from within. He says we must root them out through trials of faith. He did not elaborate on what these trials might entail. Several families have asked permission to leave Ashcroft. Master Ezekiel has denied all such requests. We are bound by sacred covenant, he reminds them. To leave is to break faith with God himself. The front gate now has a lock. Brother Josiah holds the only key, and he answers to Master Ezekiel alone. September 18, 1850. I went down to the cellar today. I told myself I was simply inspecting the stores, but that was a lie. I went because I needed to see it, the place where Prudence spent those 3 days in August. It is darker than I remembered. Colder. The walls are stone, damp and close. There are iron rings set into those walls, I do not recall installing them, but there they are nonetheless. Chains hanging from the rings. Dark stains on the floor that might be water seepage or might be something else entirely. On one wall, near the floor where the torchlight barely reaches, I found marks. Scratches in the stone. A child's hand made them, I think, the marks are small and low. I knelt and looked closer. Pictures. Crude drawings scratched with a nail or stone fragment. A cross. Stick figures with open mouths, screaming, perhaps. And words, barely legible, help us. Help us. Help us. How long have those marks been there? Who made them? The cellar is used only for storage and for discipline. But discipline of whom? Master Ezekiel keeps the cellar key himself now, along with the gate key. No one enters without his permission. I climbed back up those stairs with my hands shaking and my heart hammering against my ribs. In the chapel above, Master Ezekiel was praying before the cross, his voice rising and falling in that strange conversational rhythm. I believe I am afraid. God help me, I believe I am very much afraid. September 28, 1850. This will be my final entry. I will not, record what I have learned. What I have seen. What we have done. The others do not know I am writing this. They believe I am as devoted as they are. They believe I am complicit. They are correct. God forgive me, they are correct. If anyone reads these words, know this: Ashcroft Chapel was built on faith, but it has become something else entirely. The cross we worship has been defiled. The masters who lead us have become something other than men. And the flock, God in heaven, the flock knows. They know everything. I hear them gathering outside my window even now. All of them. 63 voices singing hymns in the darkness. But the hymns sound wrong. The words are right but the melody is wrong, and beneath it I hear something else: footsteps. So many footsteps. Master Ezekiel has called an emergency council in the chapel. All 17 masters are commanded to attend. He says God has given him a final revelation, and we must all hear it together. I do not want to go. Every instinct screams at me to run, to flee this place and never return. But if I run, they will know. They will know I know. May God have mercy on my soul. May He forgive what we have done to His children. May He. The handwriting deteriorated there, becoming shaky and rushed. Then it stopped. The rest of the pages were blank. Grimshaw closed the journal slowly. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, full darkness had fallen over Ashcroft Chapel. Jesus Christ, Pendleton whispered. Holloway spat into the fire. They got what was coming to them. Every last one. Perhaps, Grimshaw said. He stared at the journal in his hands, thinking of the circle of bodies, the fallen cross, the iron nails clutched in dead hands. But we still don't know what happened. Not really. Nathaniel went to that council meeting and never came back. Something occurred in that chapel, something that killed all 17 masters. But who? How? Does it matter? Fairchild spoke up from his corner, his voice cracked with exhaustion. They were monsters. Let the dead bury the dead, Marshal. Write your report, tell the families their people are gone, and let's leave this cursed place. But Grimshaw shook his head. He thought of the scratches in the cellar stone. The children's drawings. The 12 small graves in the meadow. It matters, he said quietly. Because somewhere out there, 63 people are carrying the weight of what happened here. And I intend to find them. He opened the journal again, turning to those final pages, searching for any clue they might have missed in Nathaniel's desperate last words. Tomorrow, they will search the rest of the valley. Tomorrow, they will look for answers. But tonight, they would sleep, or try to, in a dead community where hymns had once been sung in darkness, and 17 masters had walked to their judgment. Morning brought no comfort to Ashcroft Chapel. Grimshaw woke before dawn, his sleep fractured by dreams of iron crosses and children's screams. He found Holloway already awake, standing in the cabin doorway and staring toward the chapel, a tin cup of coffee steaming in his gnarled hands. Didn't sleep worth a damn, the tracker said without turning. Kept hearing things. Singing, maybe. Or wind. Hard to tell the difference in a place like this. I heard it too, Grimshaw admitted. He accepted the cup Holloway offered him and drank, grateful for the bitter warmth. We'll finish our investigation today. Map the entire settlement, document everything we find, then ride for Philadelphia tomorrow at first light. Can't be soon enough, Holloway muttered. By the time the sun crested the eastern hills, all 4 men were awake and grimly determined. Fairchild had been tasked with cataloging their findings in his ledger, a job that kept him mercifully away from the worst discoveries. Grimshaw divided the remaining work. Pendleton would search the outlying cabins systematically, Holloway would examine the grounds and perimeter for any signs of what had happened to the missing followers, and Grimshaw himself would conduct a thorough examination of the chapel and its surroundings. They worked in near silence, each man alone with his thoughts and his horror. Grimshaw returned to the chapel with reluctance, his boots heavy on the threshold. Morning light streaming through the narrow windows illuminated the scene with cruel clarity. The circle of bodies looked even more grotesque in daylight, 17 black-robed corpses arranged with geometric precision, their skeletal hands still clutching those iron nails. The massive wooden cross at the circle's center bore its carved markings like wounds. He forced himself to approach, to kneel beside the cross and examine those carvings more closely. Names, as he'd suspected. Scratched deep into the wood with some sharp implement, cut with fury or grief or both. He counted them, 12 names in total. Margaret Thornfield. Samuel Whitmore Jr. Eliza Creed. Thomas Merriweather. Names of children, he realized with sick certainty. The 12 graves in the meadow that Nathaniel's journal had mentioned. But there was more. Beneath each name, a date. Beneath each date, a single word carved even deeper, murdered. Grimshaw sat back on his heels, his heart hammering. Not died. Not passed. Murdered. Someone had carved that accusation into the very cross the masters had worshipped, had laid it here in the center of their corpses like a declaration. He photographed the cross with the daguerreotype camera they'd brought, awkward work in the dim chapel, requiring several attempts and adjustments. The plates would take hours to develop, but he needed documentation of everything they found. Then he turned his attention to the bodies themselves. Moving among the dead required an effort of will that left Grimshaw's hands trembling. He'd seen death before, plenty of it, but this felt different. Personal. Intentional. Each corpse told a story if one had the stomach to read it. The body nearest the altar, the largest, wearing robes more ornate than the others, showed signs of strangulation. The neck bones were fractured, displaced. Grimshaw consulted Nathaniel's journal description of the masters and determined this was likely Ezekiel Harrow himself, the leader who'd claimed divine visions and kept the cellar key. The next body bore a crushed skull, the bone caved inward on the left side. Another showed multiple stab wounds in the chest and abdomen. Grimshaw counted at least 7 separate penetrations. A fourth appeared to have been beaten with something heavy and blunt, ribs shattered, arms broken in defensive positions. Not all had died violently. 3 of the bodies showed no obvious trauma but had a peculiar discoloration around their mouths and in the collapsed tissues of their throats. Poison, perhaps. Or suffocation by some means that left no marks on bone. The violence was intimate and varied, not the work of a single killer in a single rage, but something methodical. Deliberate. Multiple people, multiple methods, over what must have been hours. Grimshaw found himself thinking of Nathaniel's final entry, "They know everything." What had the followers discovered? What secrets had driven them to such collective vengeance? He found part of the answer in the master's quarters behind the altar. The room was small, lined with narrow cots where the 17 leaders had slept. Personal belongings remained, clothes, prayer books, letters from families they'd left behind. Grimshaw searched systematically, finding nothing unusual until he moved one of the cots and discovered a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a hidden cache, journals belonging to other masters, letters that had been confiscated and never sent, and a ledger written in a cipher that Grimshaw couldn't immediately decode. But tucked among these documents was something that required no decoding, a series of sketches, crude but unmistakable, depicting acts that made his stomach turn. Children's faces. Children's bodies. The cellar with its chains. Grimshaw closed his eyes briefly, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He understood now. Understood the scratches in the cellar stone, the desperate, "Help US," carved there. Understood why 12 children lay in graves while their murderers claimed God's will. Understood the rage that would drive mothers and fathers to bar the chapel doors and exact justice with their own hands. He gathered the documents carefully, wrapping them in cloth. Evidence. Proof of crimes that would never see a courtroom, committed by men who'd already faced their judgment. Outside, he found Holloway examining the ground near the cabins with his tracker's eye for detail. "Found something," Holloway called, waving Grimshaw over. "Look here." The earth near the largest cabin, the communal dining hall, from its size and the long tables visible through its windows, showed signs of a gathering. Footprints, dozens of them, all converging on this spot. The grass was trampled flat in a rough circle. They met here, Holloway said, pointing. The night before the killings, I'd wager. See how the dew patterns are disturbed. And here, he indicated several sets of tracks leading from the circle toward the chapel. They went together. Not running. Walking steady-like. Purposeful. How many? Grimshaw asked. Holloway studied the ground, his weathered face thoughtful. Hard to say exactly. 40, maybe 50. Mix of men, women, even some smaller prints, older children, likely. They gathered here, then moved as a group toward the chapel. An army, Grimshaw said quietly. Not a mob. They planned this. Aye, Holloway agreed. And then they vanished like morning mist. No tracks leading out, no signs of carts or horses being loaded. It's like they walked into the chapel and disappeared into thin air. But Grimshaw was already moving, following the trampled path toward the chapel's rear. If 60-some people had gathered and then dispersed, there had to be signs. Tracks evidence of their escape route. He found it behind the chapel, partially concealed by overgrown brush, a narrow trail leading up into the wooded hills. Fresh growth had reclaimed much of it, but the signs were there for those who knew how to look. Broken branches at shoulder height. Disturbed earth. The faint remains of footprints where the trail crossed a muddy patch. They went into the wilderness, Grimshaw said, staring up at the dense forest. After it was done, they scattered into the hills. Small groups, probably. Harder to track that way. Harder to find. Smart, Holloway admitted grudgingly. And desperate. You don't take that path unless you're running from something worse than wilderness. Inside the dining hall, Pendleton had made his own grim discovery. The young deputy met them at the door, his face pale but his voice steady. Marshal, you need to see this. On the hall's main table, arranged in neat rows, were documents. Letters, dozens of them, all addressed to families in Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York. All dated from July, August, and September. All unsent. Grimshaw picked one up, recognizing the name on the envelope, Whitmore. The family who'd first raised the alarm. He opened it carefully. Dearest Mother and Father. I write to you in haste and in fear. I have been forbidden to send letters, but I managed to steal paper and ink from Brother Nathaniel's quarters. If this reaches you, please send help. Send the authorities. Send anyone who will listen. Ashcroft Chapel is not what we were promised. The masters are not holy men. They are monsters who hide behind Scripture. My dearest friend Ruth was taken as a spiritual wife to Master Silas. She cries herself to sleep every night. The children are starving because the masters hoard food for themselves. And there are things happening in the cellar, terrible things that I dare not write in full, lest this letter be discovered. We are prisoners here, Mother. The gates are locked. Those who try to leave are punished. Please, I beg you, send help before. The letter ended abruptly, the final sentence unfinished. It had never been sent. None of them had. The masters had intercepted every attempt at communication, isolating their followers completely. There are more, Pendleton said quietly. Dozens more. All saying similar things. All confiscated. Grimshaw set the letter down carefully, his hands shaking with anger. Collect them all. Every single one. Their evidence. Evidence of what, sir? The men who committed these crimes are dead. Evidence of why they died, Grimshaw replied sharply. Evidence that what happened here, however horrible, may have been the only justice these people could hope for. They spent the rest of the day in systematic documentation. Fairchild catalogued the letters and documents. Pendleton photographed the cabins and their abandoned contents. Holloway mapped the settlement and the escape trails. Grimshaw returned to the cellar. He descended those narrow stone stairs with a lantern held high, his revolver drawn though he knew no living threat awaited him. The cellar was larger than it appeared from above, extending beneath the entire chapel. Stone walls glistened with moisture. The air was cold and foul. The chains were real. The iron rings set into the walls were real. The dark stains on the floor were real, and Grimshaw's law enforcement experience told him they were blood, old and dried but unmistakable. He found the children's scratches on the far wall, where Nathaniel had described them. Help U.S. carved in desperate letters. Stick figures with open mouths. And something else, a calendar, scratched one mark at a time. Grimshaw counted them, 143 marks. 143 days that some child had been kept down here, marking time in the darkness. His lantern revealed more horrors, a small wooden doll, its paint faded. A child's shoe. A lock of hair tied with ribbon. Mementos or trophies, he couldn't tell which. Evidence of suffering that no court would ever hear, of crimes that no judge would ever sentence. When he emerged from the cellar, the sun was setting. His 3 companions waited in the chapel, their faces grim. "We have enough," Grimshaw said, his voice rough. "More than enough. We'll spend one more night here, organize our findings, then ride for Philadelphia at dawn." "What will you tell them?" Fairchild asked. "The families? The authorities?" Grimshaw looked at the circle of bodies, at the fallen cross with its carved accusations, at the iron nails clutched in dead hands. He thought of the letters never sent, the children never saved, the justice that came too late and at too terrible a price. "The truth," he said finally. "Or as much of it as they can bear to hear." That night, they returned to their cabin and compiled their findings by lamplight. Documents, photographs, testimonies recorded in Fairchild's precise hand. A catalogue of horrors and a record of justice, however bloody. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it that same sound Holloway had mentioned, singing, or wind, or something in between. The hymn of a dead community, still echoing through the valley. Grimshaw did not sleep. Instead, he sat by the window with Nathaniel's journal open in his lap, reading those final desperate entries again and again, searching for answers that might never come. The followers had risen up. They had judged their masters and found them wanting. They had executed judgment with their own hands, then vanished into the wilderness carrying the weight of what they'd done. But had it been justice? Or murder? Or something in between, that gray space where the law fails and people take righteousness into their own hands? He didn't know. God help him, he didn't know. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our horrifying true history stories. Comment your theories below. The ride back to Philadelphia took 4 days of hard travel, their saddlebags heavy with documentation and their minds heavier still with what they'd witnessed. Grimshaw reported directly to Chief Marshal Henry Thaddeus, presenting the evidence in the man's oak-paneled office while autumn rain lashed the windows. Thaddeus examined the photographs with a physician's detachment, read the confiscated letters with growing disgust, and studied Nathaniel's journal in grim silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. 17 dead. 63 missing. And evidence of crimes that would have seen every one of those masters hanged, had they lived to face trial. He set the journal down and fixed Grimshaw with a steady gaze. "What's your recommendation, Marshal?" "Find the followers," Grimshaw replied without hesitation. "They're witnesses. Some may have been complicit in the murders, others merely present. We need their testimony to understand what happened. To what end? The perpetrators are dead. No trial can touch them now." "No, sir. But those people, the ones who fled, they're living with what they did. Some may need protection from prosecution. Others may need." He paused, searching for the right word. "Absolution." Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. "Then, find them. Bring me testimony. But Grimshaw, tread carefully. This is the kind of story that could ignite a firestorm. Religious persecution. Vigilante justice. Dead children. Every newspaper from here to Boston would feast on it for months. Yes, sir. And Grimshaw? When you find these people, remember, they may have been victims first and killers second. Keep that in mind. The search took 3 weeks. Grimshaw and Pendleton worked systematically, visiting towns and settlements within 100 miles of Ashcroft Chapel. They showed sketches drawn from the daguerreotypes found in abandoned cabins, faces of men, women, and children who'd once called that cursed valley home. They asked questions in general stores, boarding houses, churches, and taverns. Most inquiries led nowhere. But slowly, painfully, a pattern emerged. A woman matching the description of Constance Merriweather had been seen in Harrisburg, working as a seamstress under a different name. A family resembling the Torrances had passed through Lancaster, heading west. 2 young men fitting the descriptions of former Ashcroft members had taken work at a lumber camp near Scranton. But when Grimshaw attempted to locate these people for questioning, he found only empty rooms and forwarded wages. They'd moved on, always one step ahead, as if some invisible network warned them of his approach. The breakthrough came in a small village called Millbrook, 40 miles northeast of Ashcroft. Grimshaw was questioning the proprietor of a modest inn when the man's wife, a thin, nervous woman named Mrs. Blackwell, suddenly spoke up. "You're asking about Ashcroft Chapel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the people who lived there." Grimshaw turned to her, careful to keep his expression neutral. "Yes, ma'am. Do you know something?" Mrs. Blackwell glanced at her husband, who gave a reluctant nod. "There's a woman. Lives in a cabin about 3 miles north of here, up near Widow's Creek. Keeps to herself mostly. But I've seen her in town, and I recognized her from the sketches you showed. She's been here about a month." "What name does she use?" "Mary Smith." Mrs. Blackwell's lips thinned. "Though I suspect that's not her real name. She pays in coin, speaks little, and jumps at shadows. Got a haunted look about her." Grimshaw and Pendleton found the cabin the next morning. It was a ramshackle structure half hidden by pine trees, smoke rising from its chimney. Grimshaw approached alone, his hands visible and empty, while Pendleton waited with the horses. He knocked 3 times. The door opened a crack, revealing a woman's face, gaunt, prematurely aged, with dark circles beneath her eyes. She was perhaps 35 but looked 50. When she saw Grimshaw's federal marshal badge, she went pale as milk. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I haven't done anything. I've been quiet. I've caused no trouble. I'm not here to arrest you, ma'am," Grimshaw said gently. "I just need to talk. May I come in?" She hesitated, then opened the door wider. The cabin's interior was spare but clean, a bed, a table, a chair by the fire. On the mantel sat a small wooden cross, and beside it, a daguerreotype of a young boy with serious eyes. "Your son?" Grimshaw asked, nodding toward the photograph. The woman's face crumpled. "Thomas. He was 8 years old when—" She couldn't finish. Grimshaw understood. Thomas Merriweather, one of the 12 names carved into the cross. This was Constance, the mother Nathaniel had mentioned in his journal. "I'm Marshal Theodore Grimshaw. I was at Ashcroft Chapel. I saw what happened there." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I saw the cross. I saw your son's name." Constance sank into the chair, her hands twisting in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "Are you going to hang me, Marshal?" "I don't know yet. That depends on what you tell me." He pulled the other chair close and sat, meeting her eyes. "I need to understand what happened. The truth, Mrs. Merriweather. All of it." She was silent so long he thought she might refuse. Then she began to speak, her voice hollow and distant, as if recounting someone else's story. "We came to Ashcroft seeking God," she said. "My husband Joseph and I, and our Thomas. We'd heard Master Ezekiel speak in Philadelphia, such passion, such certainty. He promised us a pure life, free from the corruption of cities. A place where our son could grow in righteousness. When did things change? Gradually. Like winter creeping in, you don't notice until you're already frozen." She stared into the fire. "The rules grew stricter. The punishments are harsher. The masters took more and more control. They read our letters. They decided who could leave and who must stay. They locked the gates and called it protection from the sinful world." "The children," Grimshaw prompted gently. "Tell me about the children." Constance's hands clenched into fists. "They called it spiritual education. Said the children needed to learn discipline, to have wickedness driven from their souls. Thomas was taken to the cellar after he was caught sharing his bread with a younger child during a fasting day. Master Ezekiel said sharing was theft from God. How long was he kept there? 3 days for the first time. He came back changed, quiet, fearful. He wouldn't speak of what happened." Her voice cracked. "The second time was 2 weeks. When he came back, he wasn't my Thomas anymore. He was hollow. Empty. And he was sick. Burning with fever. The journal said he died. He starved to death, Marshal. While the masters ate their fill in their quarters, my boy wasted away because they said his fever was God's judgment for his sins." Tears streamed down her face now. "I begged them. My husband and I both begged them to let us take him to a doctor in town. They refused. They said we lacked faith. They said if we truly believed, God would heal him. And then he died. And then he died." She wiped her eyes roughly. "We weren't allowed to bury him properly. They took his body, put it in the ground with the others, and told us to be grateful our son had gone to heaven. Grateful, Marshal. They wanted us to thank them for killing our child." Grimshaw felt a cold rage building in his chest, but kept his voice calm. "When did you learn the truth about what was happening in the cellar?" Constance looked at him sharply. "You saw it, then. The chains. The evidence." "I did. It was Sister Abigail Thornfield who discovered it. Her daughter Margaret had died 2 weeks after Thomas. Abigail couldn't sleep, grief, you understand. She'd wander the grounds at night. One night she saw Master Silas Blackwood taking a young girl, Ruth Calloway, she was called, down to the cellar. Abigail followed and heard things. Terrible things. What did she do? She told the other mothers first. Then some of the fathers. We met in secret, just a few at first, terrified we'd be discovered. We compared stories. The children who'd been taken to the cellar and come back changed. The ones who died mysteriously. The master's spiritual wives who bore bruises they wouldn't explain. You found proof. Abigail found journals. The masters kept records, can you believe that? Records of their sins. Hidden in Master Ezekiel's quarters. Abigail stole them and brought them to us. Constance's voice turned hard. We read what they'd done. What they'd been doing for months. To our children. To our daughters. All while preaching righteousness and claiming to speak for God. So you decided to act. What choice did we have? She turned to face him fully, her eyes fierce despite her tears. We couldn't leave, the gates were locked and guarded. We couldn't send for help, our letters were confiscated. We couldn't wait for rescue, who would come? Who would believe us? The masters were respected men, pillars of faith. We were just their deluded followers. Grimshaw leaned forward. Tell me about the night of September 29th, tell me exactly what happened. Constance was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. We gathered in secret, all of us who knew the truth. 58 souls in total. Some were afraid. Some wanted to wait, to try again to escape. But Abigail stood in the center of us all and said that we'd waited long enough. That our children's ghosts cried out for justice. That God had given us hands and strength for a reason. She led you. She did. We made a plan. The masters held their council meetings every Wednesday evening, all 17 of them, gathered in the chapel to decide our fates. We would wait until they were assembled, then. She swallowed hard. Then we would ensure they never hurt anyone again. You barred the doors. Abigail and her husband Joseph did. Strong timber wedged against the handles, rope tied tight. The windows were too high and narrow for escape. The masters were trapped inside. And then we went in through the back entrance, the one that led directly to the cellar stairs. Small groups, 5 or 6 at a time. We didn't rush. We didn't charge in screaming. We walked calmly and purposefully, and we faced them one by one. Grimshaw thought of the varied deaths: strangulation, bludgeoning, stabbing, poison. Each of you chose your own method. Each family chose how to face the master who'd harmed them most. Constance's voice was flat now, emotionless. Sister Abigail strangled Master Ezekiel with her own hands, the hands that had once held her daughter. The Whitmore family beat Master Silas, who'd taken their daughter Prudence as his spiritual wife. The Calloway brothers stabbed Master Marcus, who'd hurt their sister in that cellar. And you? What did you do, Mrs. Merriweather? She met his eyes without flinching. I held the cup of hemlock to Master Nathaniel's lips and watched him drink. He was the one who took Thomas to the cellar the first time. He was the one who said my son needed to learn discipline. Nathaniel tried to escape. We found his body outside. He broke free somehow. Ran for the door. But he drank enough poison, he only made it a few yards before he collapsed. She paused. He had a journal. We didn't know until after. Perhaps if we'd read it, we'd have known he had some doubt. Some conscience. Perhaps we'd have shown him mercy. Perhaps, Grimshaw said quietly. But you didn't. No. We didn't. What about the cross? The arrangement of the bodies? For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed Constance's face. That wasn't planned, exactly. After it was done, after they were all dead, we stood in that chapel covered in blood and realized what we'd become. Killers. Murderers, same as them. But you felt it was justified. Justified? She laughed bitterly. I don't know, Marshal. I killed a man. I held poison to his lips and watched him die. Does it matter that he deserved it? Does it matter that he killed my son first? I'll carry that weight until I die, and perhaps beyond. The cross, Grimshaw prompted again. It was Abigail's idea. She said we should make a testimony, something that would tell the truth even if we couldn't. She took a knife and carved our children's names into the cross that hung behind the altar. 12 names. 12 murders that the masters had committed in God's name. And then you pulled it down. Joseph Thornfield and Samuel Whitmore did. Tore it right off the wall and laid it in the center of the floor. Then we arranged the masters around it, a circle, like they'd made us stand during punishments. We put nails in their hands, like they'd nailed shut the gates that kept us prisoner. A message, Grimshaw said. For whoever found them. A testimony, Constance corrected. Let the world see what happens when false prophets hide behind crosses. Let them see that God's justice can come through human hands when the law fails to protect the innocent. And then you all fled. We scattered. Small groups, different directions. We'd prepared supplies in secret, food, money, clothes. Some went west. Some went east. We swore we'd never speak of Ashcroft again, never contact each other, never return. She looked at Grimshaw with hollow eyes. And yet here you are, asking me to testify. Will you? Will you tell this story to the authorities, to a magistrate? Help us understand what happened. Constance stood and walked to the mantel, touching the photograph of her son with gentle fingers. If I testify, what happens to me? To the others? I don't know, Grimshaw admitted. The law is clear, murder is murder, regardless of circumstance. But the law is also just, or meant to be. A jury might see things differently when they hear the full story. When they know what was done to your children. Or they might see a mob of religious fanatics who killed their leaders and fled justice. They might, Grimshaw agreed. But Mrs. Merriweather, Constance, the truth matters. Your son's name is carved on that cross. His story deserves to be told. She was quiet for a long time. Then, I'll testify. But I'll do it on one condition. What's that? Find the others. Let them tell their stories too. Don't let this be about one woman's rage. Let it be about what it really was, a community driven to desperate action by monsters who hid behind scripture. Grimshaw stood and extended his hand. I'll find them. I promise. She shook his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Some won't speak. Some are too broken by what happened. But others might welcome the chance to finally tell the truth. As Grimshaw and Pendleton rode away from the cabin, the younger deputy was quiet for a mile before finally speaking. Are we really going to arrest them all, sir? After everything they suffered? Grimshaw thought of the children's scratches in the cellar stone. Of 12 small graves. Of a mother's hand holding poison to her child's killer. Of justice that came too late and at too terrible a price. I don't know, Pendleton. I honestly don't know. But he would find them. He would hear their stories. And then he would let the law, and God, decide. Over the next month, Grimshaw tracked down 7 more survivors of Ashcroft Chapel. Each interview added layers to the horror, like peeling back skin to reveal festering wounds beneath. In Pittsburgh, he found Samuel Torrance working under an assumed name in a steel mill, his hands scarred and his eyes permanently downcast. Samuel described watching his wife Rebecca whipped in the chapel courtyard for attempting to steal food for their starving children, 20 lashes while the masters quoted scripture about obedience and faith. In Erie, a woman who'd been one of the spiritual wives spoke haltingly of systematic violation disguised as holy union, her testimony so disturbing that Grimshaw's hand shook as he recorded her words. In a small farming community near the Ohio border, he located Joseph Thornfield, Abigail's husband, father of little Margaret. Joseph had aged 20 years in 2 months, his hair gone completely white, his hands trembling constantly. He confirmed Constance's account but added chilling details, how the masters had forced him to dig his own daughter's grave, how they'd forbidden him from carving her name on the stone, how Abigail had nearly lost her mind with grief. But it was in late November, in a lumber camp deep in the Pennsylvania wilderness, that Grimshaw found the witness who would break the case open, Tobias Creed, 15 years old, son of the farmer Josiah Creed who'd managed Ashcroft's failing crops. The camp foreman was reluctant to let Grimshaw speak with the boy. He's a good worker, keeps his head down, doesn't cause trouble. Whatever you think he did, I'd wager good money he didn't do it. I don't think he did anything, Grimshaw assured him. I just need to ask him some questions about a place he used to live. They met in a storage shed, away from the other workers. Tobias was tall for his age, all sharp angles and nervous energy. When Grimshaw mentioned Ashcroft Chapel, the boy's face went rigid. I don't talk about that place. I know. But I need you to, Tobias. 7 people have already given testimony. Your story matters. Why? The masters are dead. Everyone scattered. What's the point of dragging it all back up? Grimshaw leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Because the truth matters. Because those 12 children deserve to have their story told. Because what happened at Ashcroft, both what the masters did and how your community responded, needs to be understood, not buried. Tobias was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, if I talk, will you leave my father alone? He's sick, his heart. The stress of what we did, it near about killed him. He's in Virginia somewhere, trying to start over. I'll do what I can, Grimshaw promised. Now tell me. Tell me everything. The boy's testimony began much like the others, the gradual tightening of control, the escalating punishments, the growing horror as families realized they were prisoners. But Tobias had been young enough to move through the community unnoticed, and he'd seen things the adults hadn't. I saw Master Ezekiel talking to himself, Tobias said. Late at night, in the chapel. I'd snuck out to steal bread from the community stores, we were all half-starved by then. I heard his voice and hid behind the pews. He was standing before the big wooden cross, the one that hung behind the altar, and he was conversing. Like Brother Nathaniel wrote in his journal. You've read the journal? My father had it briefly, before you found it. We all passed around what evidence we could find, needed to know we weren't imagining things, that the masters really were as wicked as we suspected. Tobias's hands clenched into fists. Master Ezekiel would speak, then pause like someone was answering. Then he'd speak again. His voice would change, get deeper, rougher. Sometimes he'd argue with himself. Sometimes he'd laugh, and it was the worst sound I ever heard. What did he say? Couldn't hear most of it. But I heard him say something about the final covenant and blood sacrifice. And once I heard him say, clear as day, they must be made pure through suffering. The children first, then all of them. Tobias's voice cracked. He was planning something, Marshal. Something worse than what he'd already done. Did you tell anyone? Told my father. He told some of the other families. That's when we knew we had to act, not just because of what had been done, but because of what was coming. Grimshaw made notes, his mind racing. Tell me about the night of September 29th. You were there. I was. Tobias looked at his hands. I'm not proud of it. But I was there. What was your role? I was supposed to stay outside with the younger children, keep them away from the chapel, keep them from seeing. But I. He swallowed hard. I wanted to see. Needed to see. My best friend Daniel, he'd been one of the children taken to the cellar. Came back different. Stopped talking, stopped eating. Died 3 weeks later. The masters said it was fever, but we all knew better. So you went inside? I did. Snuck in through the back entrance after the first groups had gone in. The chapel was. He paused, searching for words. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. The masters were already dying. Some were dead. The survivors were on their knees, begging, crying, praying. But no one was listening. No one showed mercy. Did you participate? Tobias met his eyes, and Grimshaw saw something ancient and terrible in that young face. I held Master Silas Blackwood's arms while Ruth Calloway's brothers did what needed doing. He'd raped her, Marshal. Called it spiritual marriage, but it was rape pure and simple. She was 16 years old. So yes, I participated. And I'd do it again. Grimshaw kept his expression neutral, though his heart was pounding. What happened after they were all dead? We just stood there. For a long time. 58 people standing in a circle around 17 corpses, covered in blood, realizing what we'd become. Tobias's voice grew distant. Then Abigail Thornfield spoke. She said we needed to make a testimony, like I told you. She carved the cross while we watched. Took her nearly an hour, 12 names, 12 dates, and that one word, murdered. Then you arranged the bodies. We did. Made them into a circle around the cross they'd defiled with their wickedness. Put nails in their hands, seemed fitting, somehow. A reminder of the children they'd nailed into coffins. He paused. That's when Master Ezekiel spoke. Grimshaw's head snapped up. Spoke. I thought he was dead. He was. His neck was broken, Abigail had strangled him herself. But as we were arranging the bodies, as we laid him down in that circle, his eyes opened. The shed suddenly felt very cold. Tobias. I know how it sounds, Marshal. But I was there. We all were. His eyes opened, and his mouth moved, and words came out, but it wasn't his voice. It was that other voice, the one I'd heard him use when he talked to himself. What did he say? Tobias's face had gone pale, his hands trembling. He said, "You cannot kill what I have called forth. You cannot destroy what has been awakened. The cross is marked. The covenant is sealed. And in 7 times 7 days, the harvest will come." Tobias, you were traumatized. You just participated in. 17 people heard it, Marshal. The boy's voice rose, desperate to be believed. We all heard it. And then Ezekiel's body convulsed once, like something was leaving it, and blood poured from his mouth and nose and ears. Black blood, thick as tar. It pooled around the cross, and where it touched the wood turned dark. Like it was being stained from the inside. Grimshaw felt his skin prickling. What happened then? We ran. Not in panic, we'd already planned our escape routes. But with purpose, with fear. Because we all felt it, something in that chapel, something that wasn't just death. Something old and hungry that Master Ezekiel had invited in. What do you mean, invited in? The cellar, Marshal. You saw it, right? The chains. The evidence. I did. Did you see the symbols on the floor? The ones drawn in what we thought was dried blood. Grimshaw's blood ran cold. He'd seen stains, but in his horror at discovering the cellar's purpose, he hadn't examined them closely. Describe them. Circles within circles. Strange letters or runes, nothing like English or Latin. And at the center, a cross turned upside down. Tobias's voice dropped to a whisper. We thought the masters were just evil men hiding behind religion. But what if they were something worse? What if Master Ezekiel really had been talking to something in the darkness? What if he'd made some kind of bargain? Tobias, those are just stories. Then explain the voice, Marshal. Explain how a dead man spoke. Explain the black blood. The boy leaned forward, his eyes intense. And explain this, after we scattered, after we fled into the wilderness and went our separate ways, some of us kept in contact. Just a few, we'd send letters to a drop point in Lancaster, check in with each other. Make sure we'd all survived. And 49 days after the purge, 7 times 7, just like the dead master said, we got word that Sister Ruth Calloway had disappeared. She'd been staying with cousins in Maryland, healing from what Master Silas had done to her. One morning her bed was empty, the window open, and she was gone. She could have run off. Could have. Her cousins found symbols drawn on the walls of her room. The same symbols that were in the cellar. Circles within circles. And written in what they thought was charcoal but might have been something else, the harvest begins. Has anyone else disappeared? Tobias nodded slowly. 3 more that I know of. Sister Margaret Wynne, gone from her home in Ohio. Brother Thomas Porter, vanished from a boarding house in New York. And he paused. Abigail Thornfield. The woman who led us, who carved the cross, who strangled Master Ezekiel with her own hands. Her husband Joseph found their cabin empty 2 weeks ago. No sign of struggle. No indication where she went. Just those same symbols drawn on every surface. Grimshaw felt his careful rationality crumbling. You're suggesting what, exactly? That some supernatural force is taking revenge? I'm suggesting that Master Ezekiel wasn't entirely mad. That he really did make contact with something dark. And that when we killed him, when we interrupted whatever he was doing, we didn't end it. We just redirected it. Changed its purpose. Tobias stood, agitated. The harvest, Marshal. 49 days. Every 49 days, one of us disappears. And it's always the ones who were most active that night. The ones who struck the hardest blows. The ones who showed no mercy. That's impossible. Is it? You saw that chapel. You felt something there, didn't you? That wrongness in the air, that sense of being watched. The boy's voice grew urgent. We didn't just kill 17 men that night, Marshal. We desecrated their temple. We destroyed their dark altar. And whatever they've been feeding with children's suffering, with pain and fear and blood, it's still hungry. Grimshaw wanted to dismiss this as trauma, as guilt manifesting in superstition. But he remembered standing in that cellar, feeling something watching from the darkness. He remembered the absolute silence of the valley, as if every living thing had fled. He remembered his own nightmares since returning from Ashcroft, dreams of iron crosses and circles that spiraled inward forever. If what you're saying is true, he said carefully, then everyone who participated is in danger. Yes. Tobias met his eyes. Including me. Including my father. Including every soul who raised a hand against the masters that night. What do you want me to do? Find them, Marshal. Find them all and warn them. Tell them to stay together, to watch for symbols, to trust nothing and no one when the 49th day approaches. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I've kept track. Names, last known locations, when they're due for harvest. Grimshaw took the paper, his hand steady despite the chill running through him. I'll investigate the disappearances. There'll be rational explanations. You don't believe that any more than I do. Tobias turned toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Marshal. In my nightmares, I see Master Ezekiel's face. And he's smiling. Always smiling. Like death was part of his plan all along. December brought snow to Pennsylvania, covering the land in white that seemed to mock the darkness beneath. Grimshaw returned to Philadelphia with testimony from 8 survivors, a ledger of horrors documented in Fairchild's precise hand, and questions that kept him awake through long winter nights. Chief Marshal Thaddeus reviewed the evidence in silence, his face growing graver with each page. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with a weariness that went beyond mere fatigue. This is impossible, Grimshaw. All of it. 17 murders, justified or not. A community conspiracy. And now you're telling me about disappearances and supernatural nonsense. I'm telling you what the witnesses reported, sir. Witnesses traumatized by what they did. Seeing patterns where there are none, inventing bogeymen to explain their guilt. Thaddeus set the documents down. The disappearances could be anything, people running from their past, seeking anonymity, or simply moving on. All of them leaving the same symbols behind. Symbols that could have been drawn by anyone, including the disappeared themselves, staging their own vanishing acts. Thaddeus rubbed his temples. We have a political nightmare here, Theodore. A religious community was destroyed. Masters who committed unspeakable crimes. Followers who took violent revenge. If this becomes public, it'll tear the country apart. Catholics will use it to attack Protestants. Protestants will fracture further. Every newspaper will have an opinion, every pulpit will thunder about it. So we bury it? Grimshaw kept his voice level, but anger simmered beneath. Pretend it never happened. We handle it quietly. Discreetly. Thaddeus met his eyes. Here's what will happen, the 17 masters will be buried in unmarked graves, away from consecrated ground. The official report will list their deaths as the result of an outbreak of disease that also scattered the community. Ashcroft Chapel will be declared condemned and destroyed. The property will be seized by the state and left to wilderness. And the survivors? The ones who killed them? Will not be prosecuted. Thaddeus raised a hand to forestall Grimshaw's objection. Not because they don't deserve trial, they took 17 lives, regardless of provocation. But because putting them on trial means exposing what the masters did. Which means exposing the failure of every authority that should have protected those people. Which means admitting that sometimes, when law and church and civilization all fail, ordinary people take justice into their own hands. That's not justice. That's politics. That's reality, Marshal. Thaddeus's voice hardened. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. Sometimes we have to choose between perfect justice and practical mercy. I'm choosing mercy, for those survivors, for their families, and for a nation that doesn't need another reason to tear itself apart. Grimshaw wanted to argue. Wanted to demand real justice, real answers, real accountability. But he thought of Constance Merriweather's hollow eyes, of Tobias Creed's trembling hands, of Joseph Thornfield's white hair and shaking fingers. They'd already paid, were still paying, would pay for the rest of their lives. What about the disappearances? He asked quietly. Investigate them normally. If you find evidence of foul play, pursue it. If you find rational explanations, report them. Thaddeus paused. But Theodore, don't go looking for ghosts. Don't let this case pull you into darkness. Yes, sir. The burial took place on a gray December morning, with only Grimshaw, Holloway, and 4 hired gravediggers present. They'd transported the 17 bodies from Ashcroft to a remote plot of land 20 miles north, unconsecrated ground that would never be marked, never be visited, never be remembered. The gravediggers worked in shifts, their breath steaming in the cold air. 17 graves, shallow but sufficient, dug into frozen earth that seemed to resist the shovels. The bodies were wrapped in canvas shrouds and lowered without ceremony, without prayer, without mercy. As the last grave was filled, one of the gravediggers, an old man named Whitby, paused and crossed himself. Shouldn't we say something? Even for the wicked, it seems wrong to put them in the ground with no words at all. Grimshaw thought of the children's scratches in the cellar stone. Of 12 small graves. Of Constance's hand holding poison to her son's killer. He shook his head. They had their words. They spoke to them for years, scripture twisted to justify cruelty, righteousness claimed to hide wickedness. Let them lie in silence now. It's more mercy than they showed. The gravediggers finished their work and departed quickly, as if eager to leave this place. Holloway lingered, staring at the unmarked earth. You believe the boy? He asked. About the supernatural business? I don't know what I believe anymore. I've seen strange things in my years, Marshal. Things that don't fit into neat categories of law and order. Holloway spat tobacco juice onto the frozen ground. Maybe there's more to this world than we care to admit. Maybe some evils are so profound they leave stains that don't wash away. They rode back to Philadelphia in silence. Ashcroft Chapel burned on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Grimshaw hadn't ordered it, Chief Marshal Thaddeus had sent a different crew, men who asked no questions and told no tales. By the time Grimshaw heard about it, the chapel was already ashes. He rode out anyway, compelled by something he couldn't name. The valley was thick with snow, pristine and unmarked save for the blackened scar where the chapel had stood. The iron cross had been torn down and broken into pieces, scattered across the valley like bones. Grimshaw dismounted and walked through the ruins. Charred timbers. Melted glass. The smell of smoke still hung in the cold air. Nothing remained of the circle of bodies, the fallen cross, the testimony carved in wood. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a reflection in the snow near the chapel's foundation. He knelt and brushed away the white powder, revealing symbols etched into the frozen ground. Circles within circles. Strange runes that hurt to look at too long. And at the center, fresh as if carved yesterday, the harvest continues. Grimshaw's hand went to his revolver instinctively, though he knew no weapon could defend against whatever message this was. He looked around the empty valley, feeling watched by invisible eyes. "I don't believe in you," he said aloud, his voice swallowed by snow and silence. "I don't believe in curses or covenants or dark harvests. You're just guilt made manifest. Fear given form. Nothing more." The valley offered no answer. The wind stirred the ashes, and somewhere in the distance, a crow called, the first bird Grimshaw had heard in this place. He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Over the next 5 years, Grimshaw investigated each reported disappearance from his list. Ruth Calloway had indeed vanished from her cousin's home, but local authorities found evidence she'd run away with a traveling merchant, romantic entanglement, not dark magic. Margaret Wynne turned up in California, having simply wanted a fresh start. Thomas Porter was discovered dead in an alley in New York, victim of a robbery gone wrong, tragic but mundane. Abigail Thornfield was never found. Neither were 3 others from Tobias's list. The disappearances continued at irregular intervals, always someone connected to Ashcroft, always leaving behind some trace of those strange symbols. But Grimshaw learned to dismiss them as coincidence, as copycat mischief, as anything but what his nightmares suggested. He wrote reports, closed cases, and moved on to other investigations. He married, had 2 daughters, and built a respectable career as a federal marshal. He never returned to Ashcroft Chapel's valley. Never spoke publicly about what he'd seen there. The official record remained sanitized, disease and abandonment, nothing more. But he kept Nathaniel's journal in a locked drawer in his study, and sometimes, on sleepless nights, he would read those final desperate entries and wonder. In the autumn of 1855, exactly 5 years after the Ashcroft Chapel purge, Grimshaw received a letter at his Philadelphia home. No return address. Posted from Lancaster. Inside, a single pressed flower, a black-eyed Susan, Pennsylvania's common wildflower, and a note in a woman's elegant script. "We carried our crosses far from Ashcroft. We scattered like seeds in the wind, hoping to take root in clean soil. Some of us found peace. Some found only more darkness. But we remember. We remember our children. We remember what was done to them. We remember what we did in return. The masters lie in unmarked graves, but their legacy grows in shadows. 7 of us are gone now, disappeared without trace, without explanation. Perhaps it is justice. Perhaps it is judgment. Perhaps it is simply the price we must pay for taking righteousness into our own hands. Tell our story, Marshal. Not now, the wounds are too fresh, the divisions too deep. But someday. Let the world know that Ashcroft Chapel existed. That 17 men used God's name to justify evil. That 63 people were driven to desperate action when all other hope failed. That 12 children died before anyone came to save them. Let them know we were not perfect. We were not righteous. We were only human, broken, desperate, and determined that no more children would suffer. May God forgive us all. A.T. Grimshaw read the letter 3 times, then carried it to the fireplace. He held it over the flames, watching the paper curl and blacken. But at the last moment, he pulled it back. Not yet. Not yet. He returned it to the envelope and locked it in the drawer with Nathaniel's journal, with his case notes, with all the evidence of Ashcroft Chapel that officially didn't exist. Someday, perhaps. Someday the story might be told. But not today. On certain autumn nights, when the wind blows from the west and carries the smell of distant fires, retired Marshal Theodore Grimshaw stands at his study window and stares into darkness. He thinks of a valley in Pennsylvania where Whitechapel once stood. He thinks of 17 bodies arranged in a perfect circle. He thinks of crosses marked with children's names and hands clutching iron nails. He thinks of Abigail Thornfield, wherever she is, alive or dead, freed or harvested, at peace or in torment. And he wonders, was it justice? Was it murder? Was it both? Was it neither? The questions have no answers. Perhaps they never will. Perhaps some horrors are meant to remain ambiguous, suspended between righteousness and sin, between divine judgment and human vengeance. But late at night, when sleep refuses to come and the shadows seem too deep, Grimshaw sometimes swears he can smell it, that sweet, putrid stench of decay carried on autumn wind. And he hears, faint and distant, the sound of a door creaking. A chapel door that no longer exists, in a valley he'll never visit again, opening and closing for all eternity. He turns from the window and goes to bed. He does not sleep. He never sleeps well anymore. The masters are buried. The chapel is ashes. The community is scattered. But Ashcroft remembers. And some crosses, once defiled, can never be made clean again. If this story sent chills down your spine, subscribe for more macabre horror from the darkest corners of history. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you discovered Ashcroft Chapel that day?